in my Amma's house in Lahore, your various abodes in India and across the world. In our family, all of us loved and admired you, but none more than my Amma. Nagamandala was her favorite play. She bought countless copies to give away to young and old as gifts at various life cycle events. She would launch into animated discussions about the blurring of myth and what we call reality, and would hold forth on how to question what is presented to us and not accept that this is how things must be, but to look at a possibility of an alternative way of being. I recall her telling you, I was aware of so much that you bring out in the play, but I did not know how to articulate it. I recall your quiet smile when I interjected and said, and Amma is a Muslim. Not so long ago, when India and Pakistan were close to going to war, I thought of my conversations with you, of the horrors of a post-nuclear South Asia. I recalled a phone call from Amma in Lahore. Do you know who's sitting with me? Saras. But Girish has gone to the police station. Oh no, said I. Does he have a police reporting visa? How absurd. Apparently, yes, said Amma. Indeed, Girish, you spent the better part of a day running around between bureaucratic offices and police stations because the group that had invited you had botched up your visa. I was furious, and later, when I spoke to you and ranted about what had happened, you turned around and you said, the bureaucracy and the police will do what they're trained to do. Of course, there are exceptions, but we must rise above this. It is so important that I went to Pakistan. I have come back with such wonderful memories of conversations, love, and understanding of friends, and again, that quiet smile with a longing for peace. And because I know you're still around, I shall not say goodbye, but rather rest in peace, dear Girish, because do you remember when you were walking me back to the Queen's Park Underground after we had cooed collectively over Radha's newborn baby boy, and we talked about Amma's sudden departure from this world. And you put your hand gently on my shoulder and you said, death is where we meet the eternal.
Thank you, Nasreen ji. And now invite Alakhanda Samarth to come.
Thank you, Divya, Neelam, Shanti. Good evening, everybody. I and Girish knew each other since 1959. That's when we first met. He saw me on stage before I met him. I was playing Strindberg's Miss Julie with Mr. Alkazi and his legendary theatre unit repertory in Bombay. That was in late 1959. And early 1960, I was playing Jean Anouilh's Eurydice. And Girish, above all, was totally bewildered after seeing Miss Julie. And he spoke to me consistently over a period of 60 years, till very recently. And he always said, you know, I was so bewildered because I didn't know whether I was in love with you or whether I was in love with theater. And it took me years to find out it wasn't really you, it was theater. So I'm just going to read this evening entirely his own words. And this is what he wrote about Miss Julie in a book called The Scenes We Made, An Oral History of Experimental Theatre in Mumbai, edited by our dear, dear friend Shanta Gokhale. This is what he said. This was about 2 years ago. But theatre was really opened out to us by Alkazi, particularly his productions like Miss Julie, Antigone, Eurydice. It was not just how he used space. There were all kinds of things that baffled me about these plays. For example, in Miss Julie, there was a scene where Jean is listening and Miss Julie is giving a long sentimental speech. She's crying and he's looking at her and some sentimental music is going on. She stops crying. Jean takes out a box of matches, puts a cigarette in his mouth and strikes a matchstick. At that exact moment, the music stopped and the lights came on. The mood suddenly changed. I was thunderstruck. I was also very confused about how the lights could grow brighter and dimmer. The fact that they could be controlled the way fans are didn't occur to me. So I asked Ashok, and he asked Meghnad Desai. His one claim to fame, Meghnad's, is that he explained what a dimmer was to Ashok Kulkarni. So anyway, we were that innocent. This was on the technical side. Then there was the psychology of something like Miss Julie. It was completely new to me. I'd read some Western playwrights in college, sure, but nothing had prepared me for the power and violence I experienced that day. By the norms I'd been brought up on, the very notion of laying bare the inner recesses of the human psyche like this for public consumption seemed, well, obscene. What impressed me as much, though, as the psychological cannibalism of the play was the way the lights faded in and out on stage. We stepped out of plays lit by torches or Petromax lamps straight into Strindberg and dimmers. A few lines from Turlach. Sheikh Imamuddin. Religion, politics. Take heed, Sultan. One day these verbal distinctions will rip you into two. Muhammad, don't I know it? I still remember the days when I read the Greeks. Socrates, who took poison so he could give the world the drink of gods. A Platoon, who condemned poets and wrote incomparably beautiful poetry himself. And I can still feel the thrill with which I found a new world. A world I had not found in the Arabs or even in the Quran. They tore me to shreds. And to be whole now, I shall have to kill the part of me which sang to them. And my kingdom too is what I am, torn into pieces by visions whose validity I can't deny. You're asking me to make myself complete by killing the Greek in me. And you propose to unify my people by denying the visions which led Zarathustra and the Buddha? I'm sorry, but it can't be done. Imamuddin, you're a learned man. You may be able to manage this delicate balance within yourself, but a kingdom needs not one king, but a line of rulers. So where are these brilliant successors of yours? Where are these guarantors of your balanced future? Muhammad, there is none yet, but I have not lost hope. And then possibly to me, his finest expression of the power of the actor to shift the universe virtually, to shift time and space, and to shift knowledge of time and space. So the fire and the rain, actor manager. Listen, son, we actors are always on the move. We're not stationary. And often along the way, we see a scene, a bit of life. Only a tiny bit as we pass by, but enough to give us a sense of the rest of the story. We are actors. We've been actors since the Lord of Creation entrusted the job to my ancestors. The earth gave us the body. When we're done, we hand over the job to our children and hand back the body to the earth. But The body needs to be fed before it can act. Even the gods, who are bodiless, need to be fed before they will act. Hence, all these oblations. But there's no oblation without a performance. And there's no performance without actors. I haven't got enough actors. It's as simple as that. Girish. Thank you, Divya, really, and Neelam and Shanti. And you know, as long as there are actors, Girish will always live. We'll make sure.
Thank you, Alaknanda ji. I now invite Martin Pick to come over and say a few words.
I first met Girish at the opening of Oxford University Press and Madras's new office in November 1967. I was fairly bewildered. I'd only arrived in India 2 weeks before as the latest recruit to the OUP. And Girish immediately made me feel that he felt rather in a similar position, although he'd already been there 5 years by that point. I think I kept asking myself, why was Girish working at OUP? I think it had been through the introduction of an old acquaintance of his, Ravi Dayal, who was working for them in Bombay. But it must have suited him to have a period of time when he could quietly get on with editing a few books and thinking about the plays he had always wanted to write. And indeed, at the end of that 5-year period, he took off to act in and help to produce his play Samskara with his friend Patabi Reddy. And that was really the beginning of his new career. He starred as you may all know, but as a conflicted Brahmin priest. And for this, his head was shaved. 17 months later, he left and left the OUP for good. And I think had always felt quite grateful for having had this breathing period when he could just get on with things without being hassled too much. I was, as I said, 5 years younger than him, and I was quite nervous when I arrived in Madras, as it then was. But he always gave me a lot of confidence and was coming and going. I think there was a hernia operation he had to have, and so he was out of the office and a bit, and he just said, "Oh, just look after things for me." And that's what I tried to do. And when he came back, we developed quite a close relationship. He had recently persuaded the OUP to publish his friend A.K. Ramanujan's poems, The Striders. And Ramanujan came that summer to Madras during his summer vacation. And I had given Girish some poems of mine to read, and feeling very apprehensive about this. But he said, "I want Ramanujan to read these." So I felt extremely nervous. But Ramanujan was really charming, and we had a long talk about them, and he gave me the confidence to go on writing. So I very much put that down to Girish as having set this all on its way. Girish introduced me to his circle of friends in Madras. There was the Madras Players, where he managed to put on some of the plays that hearing about he'd seen a few years before. And he also took me down to Cholamandalam, the artist's village outside Madras, where his friend Vasudev was already living. And that became a home from home for me during the rest of my time in Madras. He also got me reviewing exhibitions of art and indeed putting on the work of Madras artists in the office, this enormous, lovely building that we had been donated by the Church of South India. So I owed a great deal to Girish, a man of such enormous talent. What really surprised me was he always kept in touch. And whenever he came to London, he'd get in touch and got to know my wife well, and we went out and saw them several times. Saras, of course, was always very welcoming. And, this one has gone on for many, many years, while we've been pursuing our respective careers, mine at a much lower key than his. But, of course, his period here at the Nehru Centre was very much a high point when we were able to see each other a lot more. So last October, knowing how ill he was, I went to Bangalore and spent a weekend with him and Saras. It was one of the most moving weekends of my life because we talked and talked and talked. And at the end, he said, "I don't think we shall meet again." And we didn't. But I felt that the circle had been completed, and I shall always be immensely grateful to everything he was able to offer all of us. Girish.
Thank you, Martin. I now invite Lalit Mohan Joshi ji to come and say a few words.
Thank you, Divya, Neelam, and Shanti for giving me this opportunity. Mine is a personal tribute to Girish Karnad, as I knew him and as I rate him as one of the icons of new Indian cinema of the late 1960s and 1970s. My tribute is also interspersed with my personal relationship with him. Going back to over 40 years, when in Allahabad, I was overfed on a heavy diet of popular Hindi cinema. As I grew culturally in broadcasting, theatre, and cinema, there was a shift in my understanding. In Hindi cinema, there was a new phenomenon strangely triggered off by a Bengali filmmaker called Mrinal Sen when he made a Hindi film, Bhuvan Shom. This was a tectonic shift that inspired Shyam Benegal, Saeed Mirza, Ketan Mehta, and many other Hindi, Pattabhiram Reddy, B.V. Karant, and Girish Karnad in Kannada, and G. Aravindan, M.T. Vasudevan Nair, and Adur Gopal Krishnan in Malayalam, among others. These films changed the very texture and definition of cinema. I was still a student in the University of Allahabad when I first encountered Girish Karnad as a quiet protagonist in Benegal's Nishant. As a school teacher, Girish is challenged by a ruthless feudal family. Manthan followed in 1976, where he plays a committed, inspired young Dr. Rao. The audience connected with this catalyst who wanted to change the attitude of the rural poor. New cinema impacted on many of us. I wrote a letter to Shyam Benegal from Allahabad around 1977. I was pleasantly shocked to receive a reply within a week to meet him. Before heading to his Tardeo office, I bought a small Japanese Shabro Deluxe mini cassette recorder. I tried to hide my nervousness when I met Benegal and recorded my first interview with him. That was 11 years before I joined the BBC. As I came out of his tiny cabin, I was struck by a young Girish Karnad, a beautiful lady who later I learned was MS Satyu's wife, Shama Zaidi, and the theatre icon Pandit Satyadev Dubey, all sipping tea with a script on the table. That was Bhumika in the making, where in credit roll, Girish Karnad's name appears first before Satyadev Dubey and Shyam Benegal. By the time Girish Karnad joined Benegal, he was already an icon of Kannada cinema. He had made his acting and screenwriting debut in a Kannada movie, Sanskar, 1970. It was based on a novel by U.R. Ananthamurthy and was directed by Pattabhi Reddy. He made his directorial debut with Vansh Vriksha, 1971, based on a Kannada novel by S.L. Bhairappa. Later, Karnad directed several movies in Kannada and Hindi, including Kadu, Godhuli, and Utsav. On a personal level, I met Girish Karnad in London when he joined as the Minister for Culture and directed Nehru Centre. It was a coincidence that the year he joined was the year when I set up the South Asian Cinema Foundation, SACF, with the aim to build and promote South Asian and predominantly Indian cinema through documentaries, new research, publication of books, and South Asian Cinema Journal. I will never forget his interest and all-out support to set up SACF. He took personal interest in widening the inaugural panel. Once I asked Shyam Benegal his reason for including Girish in scripting Nishant, Manthan, and Bhumika. What's so special about him, I asked. Benegal's reply was, he has a razor-sharp mind. He takes plotting, constructing sequences, scenes, and dialogues like a game of chess. I would like to end with a rather funny anecdote which was shared with me yesterday by Shyam Benegal. During the making of Bhumika, Girish Karnad and Satyadev Dubey would often deliberately drop into Benegal's Pedder Road flat at dinner time for a chat and idea bashing. Neera Benegal would cook, but before dinner could be served, both Girish and Dubey would start an intellectual debate, descending soon into a shouting match. Neera Benegal would finally ask them to get out of the flat and fight instead on the Pedder Road. Sometimes it would go for hours and both Benegals would go to sleep. Girish had a set of their flat keys. In the morning, Neera and Shyam would find both Karnad and Dubey tired and snoring on the floor of their living room. Thank you.
Thank you, Lalit Mohanji. I now invite Dr. Nikhil Kaushik ji, please.
प्रबुद्ध श्रोताओं, जिसे जाना है उसे जाना है, जाने वाले को कौन रोक पाया है। छोटी से बड़ी हुई तरुओं की छायाएं, धुंधलाई सूरज के माथे की रेखाएं, मत बांधो आंचल में फूल, चलो लौट चले, वो देखो कोहरे में चंदन वन डूब गया, वो देखो कोहरे में चंदन वन डूब गया। Divya has asked me to pay tribute to Girish ji as and on behalf of an ordinary citizen. I do not claim to have any personal acquaintance with him. but I did have a chance meeting with him once. I was just browsing through books at the Riverside bookstalls on South Bank, and this was some years before iPhone were discovered, and surely people had not started taking selfies. I just looked up, and there was a person, that face, that is so familiar, a face and personality that would have attracted anyone's attention. As our eyes met, I could not resist that impulsive talk with him. I simply said, hello, sir. I'm a doctor working in the National Health Service here in the UK. I'm a great admirer of your films. You are a wonderful actor, and it's really nice to see you in person. He simply smiled and said, thank you. I come from a medical family too. Nice to see you. And we parted companies. I did not know anything about his medical background. For a moment, I thought maybe he's like Dr. Sriram Lagu. But no, I discovered later that his father was a doctor and his mother was a nurse. So he was right in describing himself as coming from a medical family. I further learned that his daughter, Shalmali, is a doctor too. Dr. Radha Shalmali Karnad is presently working in Africa. She is dedicated to the child and women health issues and believes strongly that every woman should view childbirth with joy rather than with fear of death, disability, or even death. Mr. Karnad was sensitive to such social issues, and that made him much revered and a valuable ally for causes of social justice. And he forever was contributing in whichever way he would. He remained active and concerned with such social issues until the very end of his life. He passed away at the age of 81, and living to this age in a country where the average life expectancy is 69 years is in itself a call for celebration. He inspired many from different occupations and touched us all in whichever way we would remember him. I, as an ordinary citizen, consider myself fortunate in having this opportunity to pay tribute to an admirable man who is a true gift from the Almighty. कौन कर सका बंदी रोशनी निगाहों में, कौन रोक पाया है गंध बीच गाहों में, हर जाति संध्या की अपनी मजबूरी है, कौन बांध पाया है इंद्रधनुष बाहों में, वो देखो कोहरे में चंदनवन डूब गया. Thank you, Girish, for your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nikhil Kaushik. I now invite Neelam Singh to come and share her memories.
Good evening, friends. Thank you, Divya, Shanti, and indeed the Nehru Center for bringing this evening together. Nikhil Kaushik ji, you should be a singer. What a wonderful voice, honestly. Mr. Karnad arrived at the Nehru Center in March of the year 2000. He greeted us with warmth and love. He then fed us all a piece of a sweet barfi. And that, dear friends, was the beginning of the golden era of the Nehru Center. When he was leaving, 3 years later, I remember Ravi remarking, I hope Ravi is here to listen to this, Mr. Karnad fed us that sweet barfi on arrival, and our 3 years have gone by just as sweetly. How can I justify in a few minutes 3 years of our association with such a great man as Mr. Karnad? He was always Mr. Karnad to us. He was generous, he was honest. It was a privilege to work for him. I'm going to try. I'm starting with this honesty, the level of his honesty, and this is quite funny actually. I remember asking him to sign his telephone bill and certified official so that I could then take it to the P&M department for processing. He looked at the bill and he said, "What is this?" I said, "Well, this is your official bill that you have to certify official, and only then it will be processed." So he looked at it and he marked a circle around 3 pounds something amount in a bill which was over 200 pounds. And he said, "This is not official, this is personal. So will you please tell them to deduct this from my salary and process the rest?" Well, as you may guess, this was an unheard of request in the Indian High Commission. That's true, actually. I went to the P&M department and I told them that they had to do that. They pleaded with me. They said, "Please tell Mr. Karnad to make it easy for us and let us process this whole bill, and please tell him to certify it official." I came back, he certified it official, very reluctantly. After that, there were no personal calls in any of his telephone bills. How he made his personal calls, I don't know to this day. You know what? We used to send out 3,000 calendars of events and have them posted every month. Mr. Karnad would go and buy one ream of paper and his 2 bits of postage stamp to do his personal posting. That was a level of his honesty. He was, of course, very generous and caring and daring, I may add. He arranged tickets for Divya and me to attend the Queen's Garden party. Now, this must have required some doing. I'll tell you why, because these tickets were very precious and only a few chosen diplomats were ever invited for the Queen's Garden party, but Divya and I, we went for the garden party. And up to this day, again, I can't tell you how he wrangled that one. Well, then again, the way he managed to send both Divya and me again to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Now, when I found out that we were going to the Fringe Festival, I was ecstatic. I said, "Wow, we're going to get 3-4 days off work and it's not coming out of my annual leave. Fantastic." Divya and I went for the Fringe Festival. We were given VIP tickets to the tattoo and great tickets to all the other events that were being done by the Indian government and so on. We had a whale of a time, and Divya will vouch for this. We came back really happy and so on. When we got back, we found out that he had managed to get this trip sponsored by the Indian government. Can you imagine that? That was the extent of his, he was just too much. He was, this is all coming from my heart now. He always inquired about our families, their welfare. He was sensitive to our needs. I cannot elaborate. I have very little time. I can't elaborate all those little millions of things that he did for all of us, but I'm just going to give a little short example of what he used to do for all of us. Prem, who used to then drive him around, and he's not here today because I think he's had his eyes operated upon. On the weekends, Mr. Karnad would not ask Prem to come and take him anywhere, and he was entitled to do that. Why? Because he'd rather have Prem spend his time with his family. Mr. Karnad would go take public transport, he would take a bus, he would go by the tube, but he would not use Prem. That's how considerate that man was. On behalf of Mr. Padam Talwar, who was the Deputy Director of the Nehru Center at that time, Divya, she needs no introduction, Ravi, Prem, and myself, of course, I would like to thank him for leaving us with such beautiful memories. And I say this for all of us. Mr. Karnad, we loved you. Thank you.
Thank you, Neelam. And now I invite Vayu Naidu and Nona Shepherd.
This feels like old times, and I'm here for introducing Girish's play, which we commissioned at the Leicester Haymarket Theatre, and it's wonderful to say it was at the turn of the century. I'm introducing Nona Shepherd, who is an associate director of RADA, as well as its Irish sister, the Lear Academy. And at the time, we commissioned Nona Shepherd to direct Girish's Bali, the Sacrifice. And she has some warm and strong memories.
Yes, so I was working at the Leicester Haymarket as director, and I was asked to, would I like to direct this play called Bali, the Sacrifice, by a man called Girish Karnad, who I'd never heard of. But I was told that he was director of the Indian High Commission, so I thought, crikey, it's going to be really stiff, it's going to be really formal, I'm going to have to go and talk to him about his play, which needs some work. How am I going to do it, and so forth? So I came down here to this very house, probably this very room, with much trepidation. And of course, what did he do? He came towards me with that wonderful smile behind me and having bottles of wine in either hand, saying, well, red or white, Nona, how marvelous to see you. So it was just immediately we got on. And he was just fantastic. We had lots of meetings pre-rehearsal about his play, and he told me that it was a Jain story from, I think, the 10th century, that he'd found when he was 16 and when he was in college. And he'd really always loved this myth, and he'd written it into a one-act play in Canada when he was younger. And he said it didn't work. And he said all his life it had been in and around him, it had haunted him, and he'd never quite got it right. And so when Vayu commissioned him for Leicester, he thought, I'll return to it. So he was delighted with it, but obviously it meant a lot to him. But when we were working together on it, Vayu and he and I, you would never have known that. I mean, some writers get so precious about their writing, and you can't change a word, and they'll argue with you, and no, I think it should be like that. Not at all with him. I mean, you wouldn't have thought he was such a distinguished and wonderful playwright. He was so open. You wouldn't have known he sort of wrote it. He was, he'd take your suggestions, he'd run with them, he was interested in them, and it was just a delight to work with him. And he wanted it, and Vayu wanted it, to be very inclusive as a project. So myself and the man who played the king, it was a four-hander. The man who played the king were English. The woman who played the queen had Indian ancestry. And he persuaded his great friend, Naziruddin Shah, and his wife, Ratna, to come and be in it. Well, again, I'd seen Monsoon Wedding, and I just thought, my God, I'm going to direct this amazing actor as well, thanks to Girish. Well, we all had such a laugh. We had just the whale of a time working on it. And Girish would come up to rehearsals and just be full of joy and laughter and changing and rewriting and giving bits of script out to them and so forth. And I didn't realize, because I hadn't really heard of him before, how famous he was. So in Leicester, which as you probably know has a very, very huge population from the subcontinent and from Kenya, I became a sort of celebrity through them, because they'd say to me, the man who parked my car in the morning, I'd go to the car park and he'd say, I hear you've got Girish Karnad and Naziruddin Shah. Will you come and, can you get their autograph for me? Can I meet them? And waiters in restaurants would say the same. So it was just fantastic. And he came with me to meet my car park attendant. Girish did. To say hello, because I said, Girish, he loves you, this man. You must come and meet him. And he came down with me to meet him. As you all know, that's the sort of man he was. I loved it. And when he was very pleased with the production, and when the last time I saw him, he gave me a hug and he said to me, Nona, please, I've loved working with you. Please come and work in India. Did he get me a job? No. So what I would like to say to him is, you owe me a job. Thank you.
Girish, the ultimate and the eternal Sutradhara. If he didn't give Nona a job, he made my lifeline as the androgynous storyteller. And strangely, I had met him through the work as a young college student and then a college lecturer in Madras. But it was actually, I met him in flesh and blood through my husband, Chris Banfield, who invited him to the Birmingham University. And that story I will tell you in a moment. But thank you, Divya, Neelam, Shanti, and everyone for organizing this at the Nehru Center. And I'm going to take on Muni's request about the multiple stories one has to feed on to Raghu and Radha's Facebook. This is also in great memory of Saras's and Raghu's and Radha's hospitality. I have a single line. I remember Raghu as a young boy when I was staying in their house going to perform as a Sutradhara in Bangalore. And Girish, as usual, said, okay, congratulations, let's have the first bowl of rice. And that was our cheers, because I was not drinking those days. Not that I keep drinking now, but never mind. And at that time, Raghu said, oh, Appa, can't you find more ways of dying? It's so boring. We've seen every angle of how you fall to the floor. But maybe in this wake and remembrance, now that Raghu's gone on to miss this lovely presence, yes, he even laughed about ways of dying and death. But here's to the eternal Sutradhara. There were many threads to Girish and his artistic and professional pursuits. By his fine talent and clarity of vision, he was able to see diverse projects to fulfillment. It was not merely a solitary quest. He was able to create a new space for taking us all with him, shaping change with a sense of our wonder and his collective practice. In our discussions of storytelling, he would herald the Sutradhara, the holder of the thread of the story. And when he said it, it just seemed so clear. The metaphor of the thread, the measure of the space, where imagination and its possibilities of understanding human nature are enacted. For him, it was always basically the rural theatre. It was stripped of all unnecessaries, and he truly understood the workings of the folk tale, its clear psychology through its magic realism. From the talking horse, the serpent visiting the wife at night time, a king who believed in his madness, a life unreflected in broken mirrors. He asserted that unique positioning between regional thinking with contemporary relevance. He could map a shrinking global ethos addressing climate change integrated with issues around women in his A Flowering Tree, which was crushed by property developers and indeed others. Throughout the evening, we've heard tributes to the stained glass facade of his excellences. Decades after Oxford and his playwriting, film, and Doordarshan successes in Delhi, Chicago, the world over, he came on the invitation of Chris Banfield to the Theatre Studies Department of the University of Birmingham in 1992. Girish now had pushed the boundaries of the folk teller of tales into the realms of the sociology of post-colonial theatre. In his keynote address, to which David Edgar had invited him, and I think Tom Stoppard was present, he just put out a simple note on how the notion of ticketing, copyright, and authorship brought in a cascade of ownership in the theatre with the emergence of colonial rule. The pre-colonial experience of art, experienced by rural and city audiences in India, was a platform for ideas and debate sourced from traditional texts. These were a rite celebrated in performance during changes of season and festivals, with music as the vehicle of the plays. This music, he always asserted, was the emotive intelligence of the play. Now, with the exchange of money in a transaction to experience something essential to the individual and collective self, had changed forever and colonized the human spirit. And yet, on the other hand, he'd say, in staging, as with the anecdote that Alaknanda so beautifully brought out, it was always the lighting, and he always acknowledged his passion for Western theatre. So, with all his responsibilities, Girish was the ultimate Sutradhara for me and for all of us. He was always holding the thread consistently, committed to the arts as a reality and feeding the earth as the future with the necessary fire and rain. He measured a diverse range of architectural spaces to champion freedom of speech and expression through the arts that became a way of life and his politics. He lived as he died, without dogmatic beliefs and their shackles, roaming free across institutions and continents, lighting an idea and giving voice to the voiceless. I will always remember him telling me how much he wanted to write poetry and how he relished working with A.K. Ramanujam, whom he always addressed as AKR, on the tribulations of expressing the intent of the 11th century Bhakti poet Basavana's lines. And it was Girish who sort of resolved AKR's dilemma by resonating in English from Kannada what we have today. The rich will make temples, not the rich will build temples. What will I, a poor